Hey, what's going on, guys? Rome Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Protection Paladin for Season 1 of Mythic Plus and the War Within. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's start out with some of the pros and we'll get into some of the cons. So Protection Paladin has really good group utility. There is a little bit of a learning curve in terms of how to use it. You can kind of choose specific mechanics with things like your Blessing of Protection, you have Blessing of Sacrifice, you have Cleanse Toxins, you have Blessing of Spell Wording. You just have a ton of different tools in your kit to be able to utilize to kind of help offset damage. We also have some of the best interrupts in the game, especially coming from a tank standpoint. So good control over caster mobs with range interrupt and silences. So we have things like our Avenger Shield that does a ton of AOE interrupts. We have our Divine Toll, which casts Avenger Shield, which will do even more interrupts for us. And we also have access to our Hammer of Justice as well. We can also help offset bleed damage pretty well with our just pretty crazy healing through Word of Glory. We're also pretty good against magic damage due to our Holy Shield. So Holy Shield basically allows us to block spells, which is very good, especially considering some of the hardest hitting damage in this game comes from magic damage. We have access to a ton of different cooldown options. So we have access to things like Eye of the Tear, we have Sentinel, and you can pretty much have access to something for just about every single pack on higher level keys. We have really good passive mitigation as well through spells like Barricade of Faith, Strength in Adversity, and Shield of the Righteous. They have one of the better AoE damage profiles as well. Then Prop Paladin also has access to the Dwarf Race for access to Stone Form, which is going to allow us to remove those bleeds, those curses, those poisons ourselves. Now, with that being said, there is a direct con to that. So while we do have access to Dwarf, we do not have access to Night Elf, and Night Elf is pretty much meta in almost all comps for Shadow Meld. It can allow you to skip specific packs and high-end keys. But, this is more of a beginner's guide than anything, so we're not going to worry about that con too much. Another con is we do have a little bit of ramp-up time with Shield of the Righteous. You do have to have Holy Power in order to utilize this spell, so you want to make sure that you're storing some Holy Power before going into the next pack. We also lose quite a bit of mitigation if we have to stand outside of our consecration, so we're not one of the best kiting tanks in the game. We don't have any sort of AoE grip, so it's kind of hard to reposition mobs as well. You're kind of stuck wherever you drop your consecration. You're kind of stuck there. And if mobs don't pull into your consecration, it's kind of hard to go to them, and it's kind of hard for them to come to you. We have no baseline AoE stun. We do have access to things like Blinding Light, which can be pretty useful, but it's not nearly as good as something like an AoE stun. You don't have the best mobility as playing something like Protection Paladin. And then finally, the Night Elf that we already talked about. You don't have access to Shadow Meld. Okay, let's very quickly talk about our stat priorities. So obviously, your main priority in stats is going to be Strength. So Strength gives us parry chance, and Strength basically just makes you more tanky overall. So as you get more strength, all of your abilities are just by default going to get more powerful, making you more tanky. This also increases the armor granted to us through Shield of the Righteous. Then in terms of stat priority, Haste is going to be our best secondary stat because we can cast more spells, we can generate more holy power that we can then use into Shield of the Righteous and Word of Glories. So the more holy power you can generate, the stronger overall you're going to be. Up next is going to be our mastery, and we have it down here in the bottom left. So by default, our mastery is going to be basically just increasing our chance to block melee attacks, and this will also give us further damage reduction while we are standing within our consecration here. And then up next, we have Critical Strike and Versatility, which are pretty much going to be a tie for us. Typically, Versatility is going to be better if you're playing more defensively, and Critical Strike is going to be a little bit better if you're playing more offensively. So you can put stats into those two as you see fit. So let's quickly take a look at our Lightsmith tree. This is going to be the hero tree that we're running. And then just some of our base talents and kind of what you should be looking after while you do play Protection Paladin. So first thing I want to bring your attention to is something at the top here. I'm not going to read this all out, is our Holy Armaments. So basically you have a Bulwark and you have a weapon, and you're going to kind of rotate between the two. And the typical priority is the Bulwark will go on yourself and the weapon will go on a DPS. So almost think of it as like a mini version of like a power infusion. Now I do have a bunch of different spells and things that can kind of determine when this procs. So for example, during our Avenging Wrath, if we look at Blessing of the Fortune, Avenging Wrath summons an additional sacred weapon, and during Avenging Wrath, your sacred weapon casts spells on your target and echoes the effects of your holy power abilities. So this means you do not want to be casting your sacred weapon during Avenging Wrath. You don't want to overlap those two, because that will be a waste of a sacred weapon. Now, if you do get the proc of the Bulwark, it's totally fine to use that when you're overlapping Avenging Wrath. It's totally fine to do, but just make sure you're not doing that when Sacred Weapon proc. Now, the thing that's really cool about this is right below we have Solidarity. If you bestow an armament upon an ally, you also gain its benefits. If you bestow an armament upon yourself, and nearby ally also gains its benefits. So once again, very similar to Power Infusion, like how a Holy Priest can cast Power Infusion on somebody else and they will also get the benefits. You get the same thing here with Protection Paladin. We also have a Weapon Imbue, so Rite of Sanctification. Imbue your weapon with Power of the Light, increasing your armor by 5% and your primary stat by 2%. This is very, very strong. Lasts for 1 hour. So you want to make sure that you're putting this on your weapon. Now, another thing we're going to look at is Valiance here. So consuming Shining Light reduces the cooldown of Holy Armaments by 3 seconds. So what is Shining Light? If we go to the top right here, every 3 Shields of Righteous make your next Word of Glory cost no holy power. You get a maximum of 2 stacks. So essentially what this means is the more Shield of Righteous that we get out, the more armaments that we get out, the more damage your group does, the more defensive capability that you get. Now, that's not the full story here because you do have to get that CDR by consuming the Shining Light, and you cannot consume the Shining Light without casting Word of Glory. So Word of Glory is going to be very core to Protection Paladin, and you want to make sure that you're spot healing as much as you possibly can, and you want to be consuming those Shining Light stacks. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about your tree here. So at the top of the tree, you have Avenger Shield, 15-second cooldown. This is how you're going to be starting most of your pulls. So you're going to throw it out there, and it's going to give you a big shield for 60% of the damage dealt. It's going to grab a lot of threat for you as well. So what's really strong about Avenger Shield is if we look at the middle of the first paragraph, interrupting and silencing the non-player target for 3 seconds, and then jumping to 2 additional nearby enemies. So you throw this out, and this can interrupt multiple mobs at once. And this is why Protection Paladin is so good in Mythic Plus, is because you have so much mob control. When you pair a Protection Paladin with something like, let's just say, for example, a shaman that has the Thunder Shock talent that knocks everything up on top of a cap totem, then you throw out an Avenger Shield, then you throw out, just say, for example, you're running Balanced Druid, you Typhoon into an Ursol's Vortex, you just have, if you pair up the right specs, you can almost every single pull not have a single cast go off. So I guess where I'm going with this is that Protection Paladin is almost always in the meta due to their insane interrupts that they have. So we also have an improved version of our BOP, so Blessing of Spell Wording. So blesses a party raid member granting immunity to magical damage and harmful effects for 10 seconds. So the reasons I say it's an improved version is because most of the time your party members aren't taking too much physical damage. It's normally going to be spell damage that's killing a DPS, right? Because if they're taking physical damage, a lot of the times that means either they're standing in a frontal or something that they shouldn't be standing in, or you've lost aggro. So you can be pretty clutch with this spell wording, and you can utilize it if somebody's about to die, a big boss mechanic's about to go out, you can throw out that Blessing of Spell Wording and potentially save them from dying. We also have Redoubt here, so Shield of the Righteous increases your strength and stamina by 2% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3, so you always want to make sure you're casting the Shields of the Righteous. It's pretty passive, you don't have to worry about it too much. We also have our Blessed Hammer in the top right, and you have a choice between Hammer of Righteous and Blessed Hammer, and at the moment we're taking Blessed Hammer, which will also replace our Crusader Strike. This is going to be one of your main holy power generators. You just kind of throw it out and it goes out in a circle around you. So just to kind of show you what that looks like. So on my 3 here, this hammer will go out, and you can see as I press it, I'm getting more holy power. So a very short cooldown. So something you kind of want to be on top of to make sure you're generating that holy power. Now, one thing that is really nice about playing Protection Paladin is we did kind of talk about how you have to stay in consecration for the most part, but we do have Sanctuary here. So Consecration's benefits persist for 4 seconds after you leave it. So if for whatever reason you do have to reposition, you can utilize something like Sanctuary. They do give you a 4-second buffer zone, so you can kind of maintain a lot of those defenses. Then we do also have some pretty big cooldowns, something like Avenging Wrath here. So it's on a 2-minute cooldown. You press it, you get 20% more damage, healing, and critical strike chance. Critical strike is going to give us more defensive value, and then getting 20% more healing is just going to be nice because a lot of our mitigation just kind of comes through healing. And this also allows us to generate holy power faster. Directly below that, we have a very strong talent here, Guardian of Ancient Kings, on a 5-minute cooldown. This is pretty straightforward. Doesn't cost holy power or anything, just reduces all damage you take by 50% for 8 seconds, so very strong. And then another reason that holy power is so beneficial to us, the reason we want to spend it so much and so quickly, is due to Relentless Inquisitor. Spending holy power grants you 1% haste per finisher for 12 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So this is also another reason that haste is so good for us. It just really complements the tree very well. Now we also have our Word of Glory that we talked about earlier, which is going to do a bunch of healing for us. We do have a talent here called Faith in the Light. So casting Word of Glory grants you 15% additional block chance for 6 seconds. So through our Word of Glory, we also have Faith in the Light, and we also have Shining Light. So it's very important to be casting Word of Glories as much as you possibly can. We do have some other talents down here. I don't want to talk about every single talent in the tree. We'll go over a couple more things. So we do have Eye of Tear 1-minute recharge releases a blinding flash from your shield, causing X amount of attack power, holy damage to all nearby enemies within 8 yards, and reducing all damage they deal to you by 25% for 6 seconds. So in higher keys, you can have this up on pretty much every single pull since it's on such a low recharge time. We do also have some things over here on the left-hand side of the tree that will buff our Avenger Shield a little bit more. We'll get a burn effect from it through that talent. Soaring Shield, it will jump to 2 additional targets here. And there's just some other stuff down here and there's probably some stuff up here that I missed as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Final Stand. So Final Stand, during Divine Shield, all targets within 15 yards are taunted. So typically, when you Divine Shield, you drop threat on all the targets around you. With this talent, this allows Protection Paladin to bubble in the middle of a pack, taunt everything to continue to attack them. This way, you don't drop threat, and people around you start to, get killed due to the mobs attacking them. So very important that you know how that works, because, you will be utilizing that quite a bit in Mythic Plus. And I guess just kind of TLDR of this entire tree is spend holy power and generate it as much as you possibly can. We have some other talents here like Resolute Defender. Again, more holy power that you spend, more CDR in some of your abilities. We have Righteous Protector here. More holy power that you spend, more CDR in your abilities. So that's kind of the theme here is you want to be spending your holy power on Word of Glory, Shield of Righteous, and just generating as much as you can of it. Okay, that's enough about talents. Let's get more into the rotational stuff. Okay, let's talk about your single target priority. So this isn't necessarily your rotation. This is just what you want to be prioritizing. So you always want to have Avenging Wrath on cooldown. This is going to give you a whole bunch of holy power. It's on a pretty short cooldown. It's on a 2-minute cooldown. So you can have it up for pretty much every pull. And lower keys will probably be every other pull. But you want to make sure that you are sending that. Typically on pull is going to be the best time to use that, as that is the most dangerous part of a pull, is right when you initially, pull those targets and everything hits you at once in a big wave of damage. Up next, kind of like we talked about earlier, you do not want to overlap your Sacred Weapon with that Avenging Wrath, so make sure that you are kind of holding off. If you're in wings, just make sure you're holding off on your Sacred Weapon until those wings do expire, so you're not getting a wasted charge of that. Your next priority is going to be make sure you're standing within your consecration. You get tons of defensive value for being in it, so make sure you're in it. Your next priority is going to be your Shield of Righteous stacks. So we talked a little bit earlier about Shield of Righteous and how Redoubt can stack up to 3. The fourth thing you want to prioritize is getting those stacks up to 3. You're going to be a lot more tanky while that is up. So make sure that you're prioritizing Shield of the Righteous, those stacks, and make sure you are not capping on holy power. Up next is going to be Hammer of Wrath. We haven't talked too much about Hammer of Wrath, and there's not too much that changes rotationally with it. However, during your wings, Hammer of Wrath will increase its duration if you cast it during your wings. So right after you pop wings, make sure that is one of the buttons that you're pressing. You'll get more value. Up next, we have Judgment. There's not too much to know about Judgment. I mean, it generates holy power for us, so it's used more as a generator than anything, but there is the added effect of it. If we hover here, Judgment, the next ability that we use after Judgment will be increased by 40%. So typically you can Judgment into a Divine Toll, and if you remember from earlier, our Divine Toll will throw out an Avenger Shield for us, so we can kind of buff that Avenger Shield up through our Judgment. But typically that's sort of the gameplay loop with Judgment, is you're trying to buff up your next Avenger Shield. Our next priority is we just want to make sure we're not overcapping on our charges of our holy armaments. So if you ever see yourself sitting at 2 charges, you do want to try to get rid of that second charge as quickly as you can, so we're not wasting anything. Then from here, your next priority will be your Avenger Shield, and then Holy Bulwark. And then from here, quite simply, we're just sort of generating. We're kind of going into generators like Blessed Hammer. We're using our spenders like Word of Glory to consume the Shining Light that we talked about earlier. And then just to recast your consecration will be the final priority. Just make sure you're keeping uptime on that ability. Okay, then for your AOE priority, pretty similar stuff, to be honest. Really, the only main change here is Avenger Shield is being bumped up in priority quite a bit due to Bulwark of the Righteous Fury. So Bulwark of Righteous Fury really comes into play more in AOE scenarios because it's going to be based on additional targets hit. So if you just read it out here, Avenger Shield increases the damage of your next Shield of Righteous by 20% for each target hit by Avenger Shield, stacking up to 5 times. So this just kind of naturally makes Avenger Shield more valuable to us. And then from here, everything else stays the same in priority. Hammer of Wrath into Judgment. We want to use our judgments to kind of beef up our Divine Tolls. Judgment is not quite as prevalent in AoE as it is in single target because it's only beefing up your Avenger Shield on the primary target that it hits, so it's not as big of a deal in AoE. And then down here, just make sure you're not sitting on any Holy Bulwark charges. Make sure you're generating with Blessed Hammer. When you do get a Shining Light proc, make sure you're spending that, or you're consuming that with Word of Glory, and then refresh your consecration. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.